Welcome to our BU Equity webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about equity and family engagement, perspectives on engaging families in their children's literacy development. I'm the host of this webinar, Stephanie Curitin, and I will be joined by our esteemed colleagues, Shana Rochester, Jeanne Peritori, and Deanna Leyva. I would like to start by introducing our speakers. Our first speaker is Shana Rochester, and she studies how culturally sensitive educational contexts in the homes, classrooms, and communities, and how these contexts can facilitate children's language and literacy development. We also have joining us today Jeanne Peritori, who has conducted research and written widely on issues related to family literacy, interventions for struggling readers, and preparing teachers to use educational media and technology. We also have joining us today Deanna Leyva, who studies how parents support the development of children's literacy and math skills, particularly in low-income and ethnically diverse communities. So now that you know who we are, we'd like to get a little information about who you are joining us today. So if you could please respond to the poll that we've put forth, and the poll is just simply asking who's here with us today. Okay. So it looks like we have a wide variety of people here in the room with us today. We're so happy to have you all here with us. We're happy to be talking to educators, as well as some school administrators, and even some college students and college professors as well. So we're happy to have you with us. So before we start getting information from our speakers, I'd like to just provide some information around why we're doing this. What is our motivation? So what we know is that we are in a time of global crisis. The health crisis of the COVID virus is sweeping the globe, and it's disproportionately affecting minorities. And although we have relative peace throughout the world, in the US, we're still plagued by domestic violence, particularly at the hands of our police force. We also are facing the challenges of disparities in education access across our nation due to lack of access to or experience with remote online learning. So despite these negative consequences of the global pandemic, one unintended positive consequence that we all thought was relevant here today is that families have more time now to spend together doing learning activities at home. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we hope this webinar sheds some light and positivity by focusing on positive things parents can do to help their children learn and to cope with these stressful times. And we would also like to share some tips for educators to build productive homeschool partnerships. So our first question that I pose for our speakers is, how can we use existing family routines to support our children's learning?
All right, so I'm Deanna Leyva. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by talking a little bit about what research suggests. Why are we interested in family routines? Then I'm gonna talk about some practical tips or strategies that you can use at home as a parent or as an educator to support children's development and learning at home. And then at the end, we're gonna watch a short video that illustrates how you can use some of these strategies at home. All right, so the first question is, why are we talking about family routines, and why is it useful to capitalize on family routines? Well, family routines are embedded in the cultural and ecological context of family life and are essential to family organization and family dynamics. So think about your own family. What routines do you usually engage in? So it could be anything from making the bed every single day, or not every single day, to washing the dishes, doing the laundry, small things like that. Even cleaning day. What is your cleaning day at home? Is it Saturday? Is it Sunday? Does it vary? So all this is part of your family life, and it actually it's important for the family organization and the family dynamics. All right, so what we know from research is that through family routines we build relationships, we share beliefs and values, we construct our identities, and more importantly, we socialize children into becoming competent members of the community. So kids, on the one hand, are usually, especially when they're young, very eager to be part of these routines. So they will ask you, I want to help with the dishes. I want to help with the laundry. My nephew is almost 5 and he loves vacuum cleaning. He just thinks vacuum cleaning is the coolest thing ever. So they are actually very eager to be part of these routines. And part of the reason is because by being part of these routines, they actually become members of the community, right? They have a role. Now I have a role in my family. I get to do this one thing. And when they engage in these routines, they're also learning a lot about what the community and what the family values. So this is why family routines are really important. All right, we also know from research that parents from low income and ethnically diverse backgrounds are more likely to foster children's learning in settings that are familiar to them. So I'm gonna talk about a few studies that have compared parents, how parents interact with children when they are engaged in an activity that resembles a routine or that is actually a family routine like cooking, versus how family interact or how parents interact with children in other activities, including book reading. Now you might think, well, book reading, that's a family routine, right? It is a routine in some families, particularly middle income and white families, but it's actually not a routine, not necessarily a routine in families from other socioeconomic statuses and other ethnicities. All right, so then some studies have found that parents ask more questions requiring active thinking when they are engaged in these activities that resemble routines or that are routines versus these other activities. We also know that parents follow their children's interests more, that they discuss more complex concepts during these activities, and that children are more engaged and motivated. And for those of you who are teachers or educators, you know that all these are actually characteristics of a good teacher. If a teacher is asking more questions requiring active thinking, if she's following the child's interest more, if she's discussing, she or he is discussing complex concepts, we know this is a great teacher. So that's exactly what parents are actually naturally doing when they engage with children in these routines or in these activities that resemble the routines. So then in my research, the main question that guides my research is, what if we utilize everyday routines as opportunities to foster children's language, literacy, and math skills? So now I'm going to talk about some practical things that you can do at home. So if you're a parent, you might want to try some of this. Or if you're an educator or a teacher, you might think about how the content, the lesson plan or the content knowledge that you're teaching to your kids can actually be adapted so that parents can practice while they are engaging in some of these routines. So many family routines can be turned into opportunities for children to learn. So let's say that you're folding the laundry. So one thing that you can do is you can ask children to count the number of, and it could be anything. So how many black socks do we have? Or black socks versus white socks. Or you can ask them to sort or classify. Let's put here all the red clothes versus the white clothes. Or we're gonna put all your clothes here and all that's clothes here. So small things like that actually are good opportunities for children to practice foundational skills. In this case, foundational math skills such as counting, sorting, classifying. Let's say that you're setting the table. You can ask your child, how many people are going to eat today? And then let's say that it's 4 people. Okay, if there are 4 people, how many plates do we need? How many forks and how many knives? How many napkins? So things like that are also opportunities that you can use for them to practice the skills that they need in order to be successful in school. Let's say that you're cooking, you are baking an apple pie. Now that we're after COVID-19, we all became bakers and great cooks. So let's say that you're baking an apple pie and your child wants to help, or you can actually say, do you want to help with this? Okay, so bring 3 apples, or I have 3 apples here and I really need 5. So how many more apples do I need? So things like adding or subtracting, or even if depending on their age, they might be able to help you to measure or estimate some ingredients such as flour or milk. Those are also great opportunities for them to practice their math skills. And I know that many of you are interested more in language and literacy. So if I am interested in language and literacy, what can I do? Well, we know from prior research conducted by me, but by many other colleagues as well, that when the family comes together to eat is a great time, a great opportunity for you to talk about, to develop language and literacy skills through talking. So you can ask your child to tell you a story. Tell me what you did today, or tell me what did you do with your brother yesterday? I didn't see that. Or what movie were you watching, or what book were you reading, or things like that. So that we know that narrative skills are actually very important predictors of reading comprehension. So the more we can develop these narrative skills, this ability to tell stories, the better they will do in school. Another thing that I was thinking is that if you are talking about so now with COVID-19, there are many new words, for example, quarantine or virus or social distancing. So this is new vocab that we are, as adults, are using and that kids are listening. So this is a great opportunity for us to explain, what do these words mean? And can you use it in a different context? So for example, what's the difference between virus and bacteria, or quarantine? Is that the same as lockdown and things like that? All right, I also want to bring your attention to a website. It's called the www.positiveparentingnews.org. This is actually a partnership between Child Trends, the Hispanic Institute, and Ivanhoe Broadcast News, and it is funded by NSF. And it's a place where parents can go and watch very short videos. They're all 2-minute videos about things they can do at home to support children's learning. And they're all based on research. So they usually include a little bit of what the research is about, but then it's all about practical things that you can do at home. So on May 16th, they posted an English and a Spanish version of a video that talks about things you can do at home to support children's learning while you're engaging in family routines. And there's also a 12-minute video, which is the long version of the the interview where I give more specifics about the research that I do. Okay, so now I want you to watch the video. It's a 2-minute video that illustrates these ideas.
At age 3, little Valentina Isaza is happily learning her letters and numbers.
When we're going upstairs, we count the steps.
We need to find an orange. Orange.
For Valentina, her sister Violetta, and millions of other young children, home is the place where learning is happening right now. But for many families, finding resources to support children's learning can be challenging during the pandemic. Developmental psychologist Deanna Leyva studies how Latino parents support their preschoolers' math and language skills in their home environment. Leyva asked 210 parents to go pretend shopping with their kids. Parents who provided more math support during the game had children who showed larger gains in math skills by the end of kindergarten. Parents who were less directive, were less likely to take over the task for their child, had children who showed greater reading gains. The findings suggest that providing support and feedback, but also letting kids complete tasks on their own, helps them develop math and literacy skills. Leyva says busy families can build learning into daily activities like setting the table or preparing a meal.
You can tell them, oh, well, I need 3 eggs, so can you bring eggs? And so you're counting. You can also compare, okay, so do we have more rice or do we have more beans?
Parents can strengthen language skills at laundry time.
Any activity or any routine that you do at home can be turned into a learning opportunity in a very simple way.
I'm Jessica Sanchez reporting.
Black, white.
Great. Thank you, Deanna, for those insightful words. I'm going to move on to our next question that we have. And the next question is, my child is curious about national and world events. How can I use my literacy activities to talk with my child? And Shana will be answering this question for us.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. So first of all, I sort of want to commend you for providing support for your child or other people's children during this time. In addition to the global pandemic that's occurring, people have been organizing protests worldwide to raise awareness about racism and police brutality that's happening in this country. And both of these events have the potential to elicit questions from children about how to make sense of what's happening. So I'm going to talk about 2 ways that I think educators and caregivers can use texts simultaneously to build children's literacy skills and their social awareness. And the first way is really closely aligned to some of the work that Deanna raised, and it's about engaging families in activities that are consistent with their existing home practices. And so in a study that I did a few years ago, I developed a series of culturally affirming literacy workshops for Black families with children in 1st and 2nd grade, based on some interviews that I had done with Black families beforehand, and based on research around Black families' literacy practices at home. And the goal of this study really was to, 1, build caregivers' confidence in providing literacy support to their children, 2, increasing the amount of literacy activities that families do at home, and 3, really improve children's literacy learning and skills. And these workshops embedded research-informed strategies like explicit teaching of letter-sound relationships, scaffolding the use of comprehension strategies like questioning or visualizing within activities, families' cultural knowledge and their funds of knowledge. And so this included using real reading and writing texts, texts that are used for authentic purposes like newspapers, brochures, writing to family members. It also included games like the little girl in the video we just watched played, sorting household items. And it also included reading song lyrics and singing along, reading texts by African-American authors, with books that have illustrations about Black life, like hair braiding. And so one of the things that I found is that caregivers who were invited to participate in these workshops actually increased their knowledge about different activities that they could do with their kids at home. And children who attended 3 or more of these workshop sessions had more positive academic reading attitudes and increased in their confidence as readers and writers as compared to their peers who were not invited to these workshops. And so I think one main finding from this particular study is that although these workshops didn't necessarily have an effect on families' home literacy activities, they really do show that doing activities like families already do, like writing a letter to someone, or in this case, writing a letter to a distant family member during this COVID-19 may really recast children's confidence as readers and writers. So that's one way. Another way that families can, and caregivers and educators can build children's literacy skills and their social awareness is by engaging in shared book reading of racially affirming texts. And so some of these, some people call these texts racially affirming, diverse texts or books, multicultural texts or books, but essentially what we're referring to are the texts that reflect and honor the varied experiences that children and people have who read them. And so a multicultural children's book publisher, Jeanne Peritori, put together an infographic based on data about the percentages of children's books that were published by and or about people of color over a 24-year period from 1994 to 2017. And these data were from the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And they found that only 13% of published books contained multicultural content or people of color. And of those books, more than half of them were created by people from outside of those cultures. And so this isn't necessarily to say that people from outside of particular cultures can't write on behalf of people from marginalized groups, but it is to say that we need more books by members of these communities and that all multicultural books are not necessarily created equal. And so because of this, scholars and my colleagues at several organizations like Jeanne Peritori, like the Center for Ecology on Early Development at BU, the Pride Program at the University of Pittsburgh, and the Sherman Center for Early Learning in Urban Communities at the University of Baltimore, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, have really curated book lists that highlight and honor children's lived experiences and showcase diverse characters. And I would just encourage you to sort of check out some of these organizations and find books that work for you and the children that are in your care. So I'd like to highlight just a few of these texts today. And if you're interested in these in particular, some of them have read alouds available online. And so I Am Enough by Grace Byers is a story told in the format of a sort of rhyming poem. And it begins with a series of similes where the main character names things that she's like the sun or the wind. And then over the course of the story, she really shifts to do a sort of reflection about love and acceptance, and has a conclusion that we're all here to help each other. And I personally like this book in addition to its message because it shows children from different racial ethnic backgrounds and abilities in the illustrations. The next book, Alma and How She Got Her Name, written by Juana Martinez Neal, is a story about Alma, who has 6 names and she thinks her name is too long. So she asks her dad about her name, and he sort of tells her the story about how she got her name and sort of the different family members that she's named after. And this book is recommended for children ages 4 to 7. The next book is Separate is Never Equal, written by Duncan Tona Tia. And it's about Sylvia Mendez, who's an actual civil rights activist, an American of Mexican and Puerto Rican descent. And the story is about her family, and particularly her, when she was denied enrollment at 8 years old to an all-white school. And her parents essentially galvanized their community and successfully led an effort to file a lawsuit in federal court. And so I actually taught with this book a couple of years ago as a part of a summer enrichment program with the Children's Defense Fund called Freedom Schools. And so I liked the book because my all Black students were able to connect with the story and learn both English and Spanish vocabulary words along the way. This book is recommended for children ages 5 to 7. And then the last book is All the Colors We Are by Katie Kissinger and Chris Bonhoff. And it offers scientifically accurate explanations about how our skin color is determined from things like ancestors, the sun, melanin. And families we've worked with really like this book. One, because it uses pictures of real people, real families. It gives families some language to talk about racial differences that aren't based on things like stereotypes or myths. And that book is recommended for children ages 3 to 8. So now that you've had a sense to sort of get an idea of the types of texts that you can read with children to build their social awareness, I'd like to share just a few tips that you can use when you're reading these books. And my colleagues and I put together a video of these tips, and you can visit that web link on the screen. And I'll just highlight a few of these tips that I think might be really useful as you think about building social awareness. So the first one is to pick a book that's of interest to your child. The second is sort of to do your homework. So think about ways that you can learn more information about the book, such as looking at the book online. Sometimes there's online read alouds. You can do things like practice reading the words smoothly. You can also look at these books online to get a sense of, if the book is something that's relevant or appropriate for your child's age. And you can also think about what are some questions that this might elicit for your child. What are some answers that they might have to your questions to sort of help you guide them along the conversation and follow the story. You can also spend time introducing the book by saying the title, the illustrator, and the author. The fourth thing you can do is sort of position it so that everybody can see, read in a lively and expressive voice. And one thing I want to spend some time on is number 6, let your children be interactive. So sometimes if you are an educator, this can come in the form of some planned stops that you want to make as you read the story to highlight different vocabulary words or different things that the illustrator is highlighting. But also, I think it's a good point to maybe highlight some of the things that are happening in the world that you know your child has asked about in the past, and sort of use the book's illustration or discussion of these topics to sort of introduce, a more personal spin to the story that you're reading. Another thing you can do is point out important words, ask your child to summarize the book, and also try to keep the story reading to about 10 minutes. So just to summarize, your children are likely aware of what's happening in the world, and in this time that you have together, you can really use 2 things to build their literacy skills and social awareness. You can include them in the reading of texts and writing of text for real purposes with authentic audiences, like writing to a family member, and you can also read racially affirming text together.
Thank you, Shana. That was really helpful information. We are going to move on to our third and last question that will be answered by our colleague, Jeanne Peritori. So Jeanne, can you tell us what are some tips for teachers who want to engage families at school?
Thank you, Stephanie. So let me say a little bit about what got me to this question. I started a family literacy program 30 years ago in a school system, and it's thriving, and we're proud of that. But one of the things we noticed early on was that despite the fact that parents were coming to school 4 days a week to learn about their own literacy and their children's literacy, they weren't interacting with the children's classroom teachers. The teachers were sort of doing the things they do in their classrooms, the parents were doing the things they do in their classrooms, and there was no interaction. And it just seemed to be not very productive, not very useful. So we started to think about how we, in fact, bring parents and children together. And that's what I'm going to speak to you about in the next few minutes. What is it that we can do as teachers to bring parents into our school life in ways that really makes a difference for kids? So I'm going to start out with why it matters. Why should we put any of our busy time toward this effort? And here's what we know. We know that when children's in and out of school learning experiences are connected, children are more likely to see the relevance of school, and they're more likely to be engaged in learning. And we know that because of these outcomes. We know that they have higher rates of attendance. Obviously, attendance matters. If kids are not in school, they can't learn. So the higher rates of attendance are important. They have higher levels of academic achievement on both teacher-made and those large-scale assessments that too often sort of guide our lives. They have lower rates of grade retention, which is obviously important, and higher rates of post-secondary education. So we know these effects persist over time. So what do we know about how to do it? What do we know about how to build productive homeschool partnerships? There are 4 big ideas here. We know that high levels of parent involvement are associated with effective outreach efforts, and you can see on your screen the references I'm drawing from. This is based on my own work, but also on the work of many, many others. And at the end, there's a list of these references for you. But so back to this first one. We know that high levels of parent involvement are associated with effective outreach efforts. Essentially, one of the things that Joyce Epstein taught us many years ago is that what we do as teachers matter. We are very powerful, and the efforts of teachers, the actions of teachers made the difference between parents who participated and engaged and parents who did not. So we can learn a lot about outreach. We also know that parents have abundant knowledge. Shana talked about this a good deal when she mentioned the family's funds of knowledge. We know that parents have abundant knowledge that surrounds their daily routines and their traditions. And those funds of knowledge are just waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be connected to, and waiting to be integrated with school-based learning. So how do we do that as teachers? How do we do it in a way that's doable for us? We also know, and again, this is building on Shana's work, we know that when teachers use what they know about children's cultural traditions and values and just daily routines, children have substantially more successful school experiences. And we know that parent self-efficacy shapes what parents thinking about and their willingness to engage in their children's schooling. So, in fact, it's okay to acknowledge that parents don't always know what to do. They don't. Not every parent has been schooled in ways that enables them to help their children with some of the specific school needs we have. And so one of our roles as teachers is to help parents develop self-efficacy so they can support their children in the ways we ask of them. So what does it look like when we do these things? Well, on the screen right now, you see one example, and I want to be very clear here that I'm showing you a single example of what one might be able to do. This is a family letter composed for use in a first grade classroom where children were studying forces in motion. So you'll see the 4 parts to this letter. The teacher has a family mailbox, and in just a minute, you're going to walk into a classroom and see this unfold. The teacher has a family mailbox, and in this letter, she tells the teacher what they're studying. We're studying push and pull forces. And this week, we're going to be studying about velocity, and she tells parents what velocity is. So, will you post something to our family mailbox that tells us about the way you use forces at home? For example, moving a heavy piece of furniture, blah, 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 you get it. She tells the parent the ways they can talk with their children about forces at home. These are some of the vocabulary words we're using in our classroom. She tells them what they can watch on television or on a video, because we know that kids are engaged in a whole lot of technology. So how do we use technology in ways that supports us? Well, she tells them about videos and digital games that support understanding forces in motion, and she tells them how to locate those. And she names books that they can read together that are readily available at their local library that can help them talk about forces in motion. So that's the letter that goes home. By the way, it goes home in Spanish and in English. I've posted only the English version here. Now, in the next few moments, we're going to walk into a classroom and we're going to see the teacher build on this lesson. Once you gather that information from parents, what do you do with it? How do you use it? This is just under 4 minutes. So take a look at what the teacher, her name is Lori Lucchese. Take a look at how Lori gathers the information and then builds on it with her children. I'll give you a couple minutes now.
Family engagement to me means having the parents involved in what the students are doing in school. So trying to find ways that we can connect with the families so that they're, it's not just homework, so that they are understanding what we're doing in the classroom, so that they can then talk to the kids at home about what they're learning and what they're doing. That goes beyond just helping them with the homework packet that goes home. So I've tried to find some different ways to connect with them. I have some examples that we got. A lot of you sent back your family postcards. So inside the family mailbox, we're going to take a look at a few examples. So this one is from Margarita. Margarita, you and your mom wrote and drew some really nice pictures that I'll come and show you about a soccer ball. So you wrote that if you hit it or kick it with just a little bit of force, it looks like it's not going anywhere. And then this picture is showing if you hit or kick the ball really hard, then what would happen to the ball, Margarita, if you kick the ball really hard?
It's go away from me, and in the TV, it was falling.
Oh my goodness. So if you use a lot of force, a lot of strength to kick that ball, it's gonna go far away from you. It's gonna move far away from you. And you said this was at your house? It almost went into the TV. So I'm gonna show you the pictures. I love the family mailbox. I was really surprised by how many parents sent back the postcards, you know, for topics that might have been kind of hard, because I looked at what they were asking them to write on the postcards and I was like, I don't know if I would be able to think of an example to write down and send back. The next.
Okay, so if we were meeting face to face, I'd ask you now to tell me what you noticed about the ways Mrs. Lucchese connected the children's experiences at home to the classroom curriculum, what you noticed about the children's understanding of important ideas, what you noticed about Mrs. Lucchese's attention to developing homeschool connections and how that contributed to children's motivation, engagement, and whether or not you observed anything that you'd use in your own teaching. Those are all questions. I so wish we could be together for this conversation, but we can't be. And so what I will say to you is that my experience in classrooms is that when teachers give children an opportunity to think about important ideas that they also talk about with their families, they're more engaged and their learning is greater, is deeper. If we take this all and tie it into guiding principles, I can leave you with these ideas. Here's what we've come to understand. Children and their families' funds of knowledge matter. They're valuable information. And in our experience, there is almost no concept that we cannot take into the home setting. We can talk to children and their parents about friction and how they use friction at home. Well, they have a sponge in their kitchen sink, or they have certain shoes to wear in snow, or they have some kind of sand or kitty litter or something to spread on the sidewalk when it snows or it's icy. Everyone has some kind of experience with friction, and we can ask questions in a way that helps parents think about that and talk about it with their children. So gathering and discovering their funds of knowledge and bringing it into the classroom in connection to our curriculum matters. We also know that people learn and communicate in different ways. So we want to talk to parents about home ways of learning and communicating so that we can build on those ways in our classroom. And finally, we know that when communication between families and teachers is bidirectional, when teachers both give information and receive information in return that they then build on, true and lasting partnerships are built. Now, before I close out my remarks, I want to take this back to one more idea. Stephanie started us on this journey today by talking about the need for equity in education. And you might ask, well, what does a homeschool partnership have to do with equity? One of the things we know is that in many families and communities, children have very, very different opportunities. Part of the opportunity gap are differences in children's access to knowledge, differences in their access to books, differences in their access to museums and other kinds of learning opportunities, differences in their opportunities for learning on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour basis. And through productive homeschool partnerships, we can have an influence on those opportunities. Thank you.
So I am just so excited to get to the Q&A section of this presentation, because there's just so much rich food for thought that you all presented here. And I'm going to just highlight for our audience the slide that Jeannie had referred to about sort of our references and recommended reading. And I want to extend a huge hearty thank you to our speakers and presenters for being here to share their knowledge. And I am going to open the floor up for questions. So if you have a question, you can feel free. I think that what we're going to do, I'm going to stop the slideshow so that you can see everyone's face. Okay. And now I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And if you have a question, please submit your question through our Q&A feature on Zoom. And I will go through and I'm just going to randomly pick some questions here. So one question that I have is from Kimberly Johnson. And Kimberly says, are parent education courses available at your university at BU? And there was once a master's degree in parent education at Wheelock College. That is, I might be able to answer that quickly. I am not aware at this point whether or not we have a parent education degree here at the BU Wheelock College. But I would like for you to feel free to send me an email and I can investigate that further for you. So I'm gonna do that one. So I'm gonna have another question here about from Amber. Amber Sansbury. Amber says, even in this video, the teacher frames family engagement around what families and parents can do to support learning at home. Have you worked with teachers, early childhood programs, and administrators to develop expectations for mutual roles, meaning school leaders and family roles, to build a mutual partnership? So I think I'm going to throw that question back to Jeannie and see if you can answer that.
Amber, that's a fabulous question, and it's the crux of all of this, because what we're saying is that we want an exchange of knowledge. We want a reciprocity, a recognition that while we as teachers know a lot about schools and classrooms, parents know a lot about their children and their homes and their communities, and that knowledge is critically important to what we do. So you ask, did this particular teacher say, wow, I understand that I've been sort of omitting a really rich resource? And the answer to your question is yes, she does. You didn't see that entire video. And quite frankly, I don't even recall if Lori ever says that explicitly in the video. But in fact, one of the things she said to me over and over again, at one point in the video, in fact, she says, I didn't think they were going to be able to do this. I didn't think they had this kind of knowledge and understanding. They thought of things that I didn't think of. So that's probably as close as we got to the comment you've made here, the question you've asked here. Bottom line is, the point you're making is critically important. we don't get there with one activity. You know, the teacher mailbox the family mailbox is a great idea. It's not the answer. Family engagement that gets to a change in this power sharing dynamic has to be much bigger than that. And, you know, we're only scratching the surface with this one example.
Great, thank you for that. I have another question from Jeanne Leyva for Dr. Leyva. And the question is, what is the best way to engage a kid in reading habits?
In reading habits, that's a great question. So I would say it really depends. The main thing is not to push it. One thing, when we think about literacy, we usually think about the written version of it, right? Because that is like writing and reading what is written. But what we know from research is that the foundation of literacy is language. If we have strong language skills, we will then, we can then build these strong literacy skills. So I work with many parents who are illiterate or who have very low schooling experience. In part, this goes back to the equity, right? So it's not necessarily because they chose not to, it's because they didn't have the opportunities in their home countries. And they actually come to the US because they want their kids to get more of these opportunities. So with these parents, what I do is, even if you cannot read or if you don't feel comfortable, there are also many parents who had a really bad experience in school. And so they just don't enjoy reading. Reading means something boring, a punishment. You know, many of them, there's actually a really interesting article but by Jane Sankermani that is also in the reference slide that talks about how reading for many families is punishment. Like, no, don't watch movies or don't do this, go and read. And so reading is really like the punishment. And so they have this association, which is actually not very fruitful. And so what I tell these parents is like, look, if you like reading, that's awesome. If your kid likes reading, that's even better. But even if you don't read, you can work on storytelling. And who doesn't like storytelling? And going back to this idea about funds of knowledge, there are many communities that actually have very strong oral storytelling practices. They really value them. They have the grandparents telling stories or other members from the communities telling the stories. So then what they can do is, if you don't want to read, or if you don't like reading, or if your child doesn't enjoy that, work on storytelling. All of us like telling stories about ourselves, about others. So that's a great opportunity for children to develop the same skills that they will need in reading, which is basically, do I know how to tell a good story? Do I have an introduction, a plot, a conclusion? The words that you use, the way that you phrase it. So it's also about opening up what we think about in terms of the concept of literacy. Literacy and language go together, they build on each other. So it's important to work on both of them.
Great, thank you, Deanna. The next question I have is actually for Shana. Shana, this question comes from Keisha Harris, and it says, have you found evidence that children who read racially affirming texts in school have greater confidence in their reading skills?
Good question. So I would say that the work that I'm familiar with in terms of racially or culturally affirming texts and children's reading or literacy skills is really related to their comprehension skills and other types of literacy skills, not necessarily their attitudes or their beliefs about themselves as readers and writers. And so that's something I wish I could have done in the study that I highlighted, but that's definitely an area of research that's needed because there's so much interest in these types of texts. And as you may or may not know, a lot of the culturally responsive work, culturally relevant work, very theoretical, very useful, but we need to find ways to sort of make it more practical and test the effectiveness of these strategies on a variety of skills, including these attitudes and beliefs. So I'm not aware of any of those studies, but I do in the future intend to sort of explore that area in my own work.
Great. So Shana, I have another question for you. And the question is from Rachel Boyett, and it says, I struggle with the terms reading to versus reading with children. Which way is the best way to describe it?
Well, I think it depends on the child's interest, on their level and comfort with reading. I think it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, either one. I think you can sort of figure out what works best for you and the child with whom you're working or caring for. Maybe younger kids, you might want to read to them or have them tell you a story while looking at the pictures, or as they get older, you know, you might want to have them carry more of the burden. I think it really depends on the child's skill level and their interest, and sort of how you are monitoring their experience with the shared reading activity. So for example, if you find that it's really burdensome, like Deanna said, for them to read to you, you might want to switch things up. But I do think it's supposed to be a more shared activity, where you guys are sort of reading together, or it's more collaborative than, you know, the onus is on one person the whole time. And Deanna and Jeannie and Stephanie, feel free to jump in.
So maybe something else to keep in mind is even that is very cultural, right? Whether we engage children, like whether we ask children to contribute verbally or not while they are reading. You know, there are some communities where we read and we ask questions. So what do you think is going to happen next? Blah, blah, blah. And that is very aligned actually with what happened in school, which is the teachers usually stop, right? They don't read the entire book, but they stop, they ask questions, predicting, inference, and stuff like that. There are communities actually where children are active listeners. They're listening, but you want to wait until the end of the story. A good storyteller is not like, if you ask me questions halfway, the kids are like, what is this, right? So you tell your whole story and then you ask the questions at the end. And so that's also something to keep in mind, that there are different ways even to interact. Like children are engaged, not necessarily, they're engaged even when they are not verbally producing, you know, an utterance. They might be thinking about it. So it's not necessarily the case that, you know, every single community does it the same way. So that's important just to keep in mind. Yeah.
You know, I would just add that to all of those good ideas, that it's very important to, when reading at home with a child, to be a responsive reader, you know, sort of follow the child's lead. Reading at home should be fun and enjoyable and something kids look forward to. And so, you know, I would follow their lead, and I think picking up on the ideas of both Shana and Deanna, but I just think follow their lead and read with them, read to them, have them imitate a voice, have them tell what they think, what they liked, what they didn't like, but keep it fun. Engage, engage, engage. That's what I think of it. Just keep it engaging.
Yeah. One of the things that I know I'm the host, but I just wanted to jump in here. One of the things that I always say, and I think about when I talk with parents about reading at home, is that the main goal of reading at home is to build the relationship and build the enjoyment.
That's
so what you're trying to foster is a love of reading. We're not trying to put the responsibility of teaching formal reading onto the parents. It's really about parents fostering that love of reading, that enjoyment of reading, because that is what sustains children and keeps them interested in reading in the long term. I have another question from one of our BU colleagues, Nermeen Deshouche, and her question is, how can a parent leverage apps at this time to teach young children literacy skills?
Well, you know, I don't know, maybe I can answer that question. This is going to sound a little strange because I've spent at least the last 10 years working with educational media, but I don't know that apps are the best way to engage children in reading. My encouragement for parents is to use apps to support children's development of knowledge about the world. So I have a 4-year-old living with me right now, and I'm very big on having him watch shows like The Cat in the Hat knows a lot about that because it's all about science, or Peg Plus Cat because it's all about mathematics, or He's Too Young for It, but the Kratt Brothers because that's also all about science. I think we use apps and digital games and those kinds of things to build knowledge about the world. And I think we leave reading skills to more interactive measures than screen time would offer. You know, that's my point of view.
Great. Well, it looks like we are right at 3:59. We still have so many other questions, and what my hope is that you have our contact information, our email addresses. I would encourage you all to continue the conversation. Feel free to email us with additional questions, with different ideas and opportunities for partnership that you might have. And I want to say thank you to our audience for coming. And I especially want to say thank you to our panelists. I'm so excited that Shana had this idea to put this panel together. And we're just so fortunate to be able to work with our colleagues from Pitt and also our colleagues from BU. And as I said in the beginning, I hope that this webinar brought a piece of hope and a piece of positivity to some very trying times, and it will help us focus on sort of some really fun, engaging, loving things that we can do right now within our homes and with our families. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great day, and happy Juneteenth, everyone.